First Ladies of the United States of America. Part 4, World War Wives. For a nation which long ago rejected royalty, the First Lady holds a position very much like a queen consort. The unelected, unpaid White House hostesses have the considerable duty of smoothing the way for diplomacy, preserving White House history, and humanizing the president's image. Some First Ladies have had major influence on policy in a nation where women are still underrepresented in government, which has yet to elect a woman president. In this 6-part series, we'll meet the 53 fascinating women who have served as First Lady and see how the role has evolved over the past 2.5 centuries. Ida Saxton McKinley was born in Canton, Ohio. She attended finishing school and was refined, charming, and attractive. She met William Bill McKinley at a picnic. After she returned from a tour of Europe, he began courting her. She worked as the only female cashier in her father's bank. They married when he was 27 and she 23. Ida gave birth to 2 daughters, Katie and Ida. Before her second daughter's birth, Ida's mother died. The shock caused an early labor, and the baby died at 4 months. Ida was horrified that she would lose Katie as well, and spent hours sitting in the dark, rocking and kissing her. At the age of 4, Katie died of typhoid fever. Ida had a nervous breakdown and developed epilepsy. She had frequent seizures, including one at her husband's inaugural ball as governor of Ohio. She took barbiturates and laudanum to treat her condition and kept busy with her hobby, crocheting slippers. She made thousands for friends and charity auctions. William was patient and devoted to his wife. He broke with tradition to insist that she be seated next to him at state dinners, rather than on the other side of the table. Whenever she was about to have a seizure, he gently placed a handkerchief over her face to conceal her contorted features. When it passed, he would remove it and act as if nothing had happened. One senator remarked, "President McKinley has made it pretty hard for the rest of us husbands." Many of the social chores normally assumed by the First Lady fell to Jenny Hobart, the wife of the Vice President. Ida was resting at a hotel in Buffalo, New York, when President William McKinley was shot in the stomach by an anarchist. He died of gangrene 8 days later, age 58. With this final tragedy, Ida lost the will to live. She was cared for by her sister and visited her husband's grave each day until her own death 6 years later at the age of 59. She was buried next to William. Edith Caro Roosevelt grew up in a brownstone on Union Square in New York City, next door to the Roosevelt family. The Caro and Roosevelt children were educated together in their home. Edith may have had a teenage romance with Teddy, but it faded when he went off to Harvard. He married Alice Lee, and Edith attended the wedding. Alice gave birth to a daughter, also named Alice. 2 days later, Teddy's mother died of typhoid fever. Hours after that, his wife died. She had undiagnosed Bright's disease, and the pregnancy had been too hard on her body. Teddy never got over Alice's death, but a year later, he rekindled his relationship with Edith. They married, and she raised baby Alice as her own and had 5 more children. Teddy became U.S. Civil Service Commissioner, and the family moved to Washington. She traveled to Florida to send him off to the Spanish-American War. While he was governor of New York, Edith modernized the governor's mansion. After President McKinley's assassination, Vice President Roosevelt assumed the office. Their children were still young and created a great deal of ruckus in the White House. Edith hired a social secretary and was the first lady to have hired help with her extensive, unpaid duties. She expanded the number of social events at the White House. When greeting guests, she found shaking hands too familiar. Instead, she held a bouquet and nodded her head. During her time, the executive mansion first became known as the White House. She preserved the historic furniture in the Green Room, Blue Room, East Room, and Lincoln Bedroom. She rescued historic White House china from antique shops and built a collection which remains on display today. Edith reorganized the mansion, placing the offices in the West Wing and the family rooms in the East Wing. She placed her office next to her husband's. The first couple met daily from 8 to 9 a.m. Edith read several newspapers and passed clippings on to Teddy. She acted as a liaison between him and a British diplomat, aiding her husband in negotiating the end of the Russo-Japanese War, for which he won a Nobel Peace Prize in 1906. After his second term ended, the Roosevelts traveled the world. Teddy died in his sleep, age 60. Edith lived another 29 years. She campaigned for Herbert Hoover against her husband's fifth cousin, Franklin Roosevelt, and made it clear that he was not her son. Edith died in 1948, age 87. Helen Huron Taft, called Nellie, was born in Cincinnati, Ohio. Her father was a law partner of Rutherford B. Hayes, and when she was 16, she and her parents stayed at the White House for a week. At 18, she met 22-year-old William Howard Taft at a bobsledding party. They dated on and off and married 7 years later. They honeymooned for 3 months in Europe, then settled down to have 3 children. William preferred a career as a judge, but Nellie encouraged him to pursue politics. He was appointed Governor General of the Philippines, and the family moved to Manila. Nellie immersed herself in the culture and tried to learn the language. She traveled the world with her husband while he served as Secretary of War. She became First Lady in 1909 and enjoyed hostessing. She was against the growing prohibition movement and served plenty of wine and liquor at the White House. A few months into the administration, Nellie suffered a stroke, impairing her speech, right arm, and leg. Her 4 sisters assisted her with duties until she recovered. Nellie Taft racked up many First Lady firsts, including first to donate her inaugural gown to the Smithsonian, publish her memoirs, own a car, smoke cigarettes, and publicly support women's suffrage. Her most lasting contribution was planting 3,000 Japanese cherry trees around the Capitol grounds. After losing re-election, the Tafts returned to Ohio. Nellie assisted the Red Cross during World War I. Taft was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and Nellie enjoyed her return to the Washington social scene. After she was widowed, she remained in D.C. until her own death in 1943, age 81. Ellen Axon Wilson was born in Savannah, Georgia. She attended Rome Female College and won a prize for drawing at the Paris International Exhibition. When she met Woodrow Wilson, he was drawn to her splendid laughing eyes. They became engaged but postponed the wedding while he attended university and she the Art Students League of New York. They wed when he was 28 and she 25. Woodrow took a teaching position in Pennsylvania, and there the couple had 3 daughters. Ellen insisted that her children not be born Yankees, so she stayed with relatives in the South for her deliveries. Wilson was elected president in 1912, and the couple decided not to throw an inaugural ball. Helen kept entertainments very simple. She arranged White House weddings for her youngest 2 daughters. She died of Bright's disease at the White House in 1914, age 54. Her eldest unmarried daughter, Margaret Wilson, took over as acting First Lady until her father remarried. In 1938, Margaret traveled to India and became a Hindu nun. She died there in 1944, age 57. Edith Bolling Wilson was born in Virginia. Her family had owned a plantation and enslaved people and lost much of their wealth in the Civil War. Edith was kept at home and taught to read and write by her bedridden grandmother. She was sent to finishing school but was ill-prepared and undisciplined, and dropped out within a year. During a visit to Washington, she met and married a jeweler, Norman Galt. She had one son who died days after birth. Norman died unexpectedly at 43. In 1915, she was introduced to the recently widowed President Woodrow Wilson. He took an instant liking to her and proposed. As his wife had died only 7 months earlier, rumors flew that the pair had committed adultery, and even that they had murdered Ellen Wilson. They decided to wait until a full year had passed, and they wed quietly at her D.C. home. He was 59 and she 43. During World War I, Edith observed gasless Sundays, meatless Mondays, and wheatless Wednesdays. She set sheep to graze on the White House lawn and auctioned off their wool for the Red Cross. She took special care of her husband's health as he faced insurmountable stress. The Wilsons went to Europe twice to visit troops and to sign the Treaty of Versailles. Upon returning home, Woodrow suffered a stroke, which left him bedridden and partially paralyzed. Edith concealed the extent of his illness from the public. For the final 18 months of his presidency, Edith was the sole link between the president and his cabinet. She decided which issues were brought to him and took over the routine duties of the executive branch. She even had the Secretary of State fired for calling cabinet meetings without her. To throw off suspicion, she posed Woodrow for this photo in which he appears to be hard at work. Edith's role as effectively the unelected President of the United States remains one of the biggest controversies of the office. When Woodrow's second term ended, the couple retired to their Washington home. She cared for him until his death 3 years later. Edith published her memoirs and died in 1961, age 89. She was buried next to Woodrow at the Washington National Cathedral. Florence Harding was born in Ohio to a wealthy family. In addition to school, her father taught her business skills. She trained at the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music and played piano 7 hours a day, once until her fingers bled. Her father beat her with a cherry switch, so at 19 she eloped with Henry DeWolf. They had one son, Marshall, before Henry abandoned her. After her husband attempted to rob a train, Florence divorced him. She taught piano to support her son. The brother of one of her students, Warren Harding, asked her out. He was 5 years her junior. Her father opposed, calling Warren a social climber and alleging that he had black ancestry. He threatened to shoot the groom at the courthouse, but the marriage went ahead. He purchased the Marion Star newspaper, and she helped him build it into a success and hired its first female reporter. They did not have any children together. Her son Marshall died of tuberculosis at 35. While Florence was recovering from kidney surgery, Warren had the first of many adulterous affairs. Florence considered divorce, but she was too invested in his rising political career. During World War I, Florence found housing and daycares for working mothers. She passionately supported the women's suffrage movement, while Warren remained silent. The 19th Amendment was passed in 1920, and Florence was later the first First Lady to cast a vote. Her newspaper savvy helped Warren run for president. She spun the story that she had been widowed, not divorced, and prevented his mistresses from going public. She even set off a craze for her favorite breakfast food, waffles. On election night, a mob of supporters lifted Mrs. Harding onto their shoulders. Florence was active in Warren's administration, recommending cabinet members and writing speeches. She opened the White House to the public and acted as a tour guide. Newsreels made Florence famous. She was filmed alongside her husband, unveiling statues, attending baseball games, dedicating the Lincoln Memorial, and meeting athletes and actors previously seen as vulgar by polite society. Florence approved of the new fashion for women wearing short skirts, but felt they didn't suit her. Their dog, Laddie Boy, became a celebrity. Publicly, she adhered to the law of prohibition, but privately, she served liquor at White House dinners and yacht parties. She loved to go to the theater, while Warren preferred to watch strippers. Florence supported a number of causes, including animal rights, veterans' welfare, and refugee children. She held regular press conferences during which she talked about issues concerning her and publicly praised her husband, though she often argued with him privately. Florence went to see a psychic before Warren's election and had been told that he would win but would die in office. She was therefore very protective of his safety and made sure the Secret Service kept a close watch on him, especially when the Teapot Dome scandal rocked his administration. She once insisted that they spend Christmas away with friends, and back at the White House, a bomb was discovered. Upon learning that Warren had yet another young mistress, Florence fell gravely ill with septicemia and had a near-death experience. But she was determined to live as her husband needed her. Warren also suffered a heart ailment. Despite their ill health, the couple planned a coast-to-coast rail trip. But the trip proved too much for the president, and he died of heart failure in San Francisco in 1923. Florence died 1 year later of kidney failure at 64. They were buried together at the Harding tomb in Marion, Ohio. Grace Goodhue Coolidge was born in Vermont and attended public school. At the University of Vermont, she founded a chapter of Pi Beta Phi sorority and performed in theater and glee club. She was the first First Lady to earn a 4-year degree. She became a teacher for deaf children. At 24, she met rising young attorney Calvin Coolidge and broke up with her boyfriend to go out with him. The pair wed and had 2 sons, John and Calvin. Grace and Calvin were very close. She had very little interest in politics. As her husband became governor of Massachusetts and then U.S. vice president, Grace balanced her housewife routine and social obligations with ease and became a popular hostess. President Harding died in office, and the Coolidges entered the White House. Grace's social events were dignified and unpretentious. The social highlight of the Coolidge years was a party for Charles Lindbergh following his transatlantic flight in 1927. The family was gifted a raccoon named Rebecca and kept it as a pet. At 16 years old, their son, Calvin Jr., got a blister on his toe while playing tennis with his brother. He developed blood poisoning and died a week later. The family were devastated, and the president suffered major depression. Calvin did not seek re-election, and his family retired to Massachusetts. He died of a heart attack in 1933, age 60. Widowed Grace continued to support the deaf and the Red Cross. She died in 1957, age 78. Lou Henry Hoover was born in Iowa, and her family later moved to California. She enjoyed horseback riding, hunting, taxidermy, and camping. While pursuing a degree in geology at Stanford University, she met engineering student Herbert Hoover. He went to Australia to begin his career. When Lou graduated, he cabled her a marriage proposal, and she accepted by return wire. The couple were wed in Monterey when both were 24. The next day, they set sail for Shanghai, China, where they lived for 16 months. They traveled together through remote areas for Herbert's work constructing gold mines. They were there during the Boxer Rebellion. They both learned Mandarin and would sometimes speak it to each other at the White House to evade eavesdroppers. Together, they translated a 16th century encyclopedia of mining and metallurgy from Latin to English. During their globetrotting, the Hoovers had 2 sons, Herbert Jr. and Alan. In World War I, the couple worked together to provide relief for Belgian refugees. They were both decorated by King Albert I of Belgium. President Harding appointed Herbert Secretary of Commerce in 1920, and he was an unusually active and visible cabinet member. He won the presidency in 1928. Lou was a frequent guest on various radio programs where she promoted volunteerism and the Girl Scouts, of which she was national president. She was instrumental in launching the Girl Scout Cookie fundraiser. So, the next time you enjoy a Samoa or a Thin Mint, thank Lou Hoover. During Hoover's first year in office, the stock market crashed and the Great Depression began. His administration was dominated by the crisis, and he did not win re-election. The Hoovers retired to Palo Alto, California. In 1944, Herbert went up to their bedroom to kiss his wife goodnight. He found her dead of a heart attack, age 69. Herbert was devastated. He lived another 20 years and was buried beside her. Eleanor Roosevelt was born in Manhattan, New York City, into an old money family. She was a niece of President Theodore Roosevelt. At 2, she was aboard the SS Britannic when it sank. She remained fearful of ships the rest of her life. Her mother nicknamed her Granny because of her seriousness. Eleanor felt rejected by her mother and grandmother and thought of herself as an ugly duckling. When Eleanor was 8, her mother and brother died of diphtheria. 2 years later, her alcoholic father fell from a window and died. The orphan was fiercely protective of her younger brother Hal. She attended finishing school in London and returned to New York at 17 for her debutante ball. That summer, she met her father's 5th cousin, Franklin Roosevelt, on a train. They kept their correspondence secret because the branches of the Roosevelt family had long been feuding. They decided to wed against the objections, and President Teddy Roosevelt gave the bride away. The newlyweds spent 3 months in Europe, then settled in a house in New York City, which connected to Franklin's mother, Sarah's. She ran both households and told her 6 grandchildren, "Your mother only bore you. I am more your mother than your mother is." This led to strife in the marriage. Eleanor considered sex with her husband an ordeal to be borne. Franklin had an affair with Eleanor's secretary and considered leaving her, but his mother advised him that it would hurt his political prospects and threatened to disinherit him. When Franklin was 39, he was diagnosed with polio, which caused him paralysis from the waist down. Eleanor nursed him and probably saved his life. She fought a long battle with her mother-in-law. Sarah wanted Franklin to retire, while Eleanor persuaded him to stay in politics. Franklin called his wife "my heroine." As his career rose, Eleanor made appearances on his behalf so that he could conceal his condition. He was never seen in public with his wheelchair. Despite her privileged background, Eleanor was very empathetic towards the poor and working class. She worked with the Women's Trade Union League for minimum wage and the abolition of child labor. In 1924, she campaigned against her cousin Teddy Roosevelt Jr. in his run for governor of New York. Her Aunt Edith never forgave her. 4 years later, Franklin won the same office, and Eleanor became First Lady of New York. She helped to found a school for girls in New York City and taught classes there. In 1932, Franklin won a landslide victory against Herbert Hoover, and the Roosevelts moved into the White House. Eleanor held regular press conferences and invited only female reporters, who were kept out of other political press conferences. She wrote a daily newspaper column, My Day, and hosted a weekly radio show. She traveled widely to support the New Deal, which dug the nation out of the Great Depression. She visited relief projects, surveyed workers and living conditions, and served as the president's eyes, ears, and legs. She promoted civil rights and invited hundreds of Black guests to the White House. When the Daughters of the American Revolution refused to allow Marian Anderson to perform, she resigned in protest. She lobbied to make lynching a federal crime. Eleanor's popularity among African Americans was such that though they had previously been a reliable voting bloc for the Republicans, Party of Lincoln, they became a consistent base of support for the Democrats. Though Eleanor and Franklin had a vital political partnership, they lived separate romantic lives. Historians hotly debate whether Eleanor had lesbian relationships. She was very close to aviator Amelia Earhart, and she had a long friendship with reporter Lorena Hickok. The pair exchanged many letters, which included such endearments as, I want to put my arms around you and kiss you at the corner of your mouth, and I can't kiss you, so I kiss your picture. Good night and good morning. Newspapers also speculated that Eleanor had an affair with her bodyguard, Earl Miller. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover despised the Roosevelts. He supposedly kept an extensive dossier on Eleanor, with which he intended to blackmail her. Before the outbreak of World War II, Eleanor asked Franklin to allow more immigration of Jews from Europe to the U.S., though he declined. The biggest regret of her life was not saving more people from the Holocaust. Following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Eleanor spoke out against Japanese-American prejudice and opposed her husband's order for internment camps. She visited American troops in the UK and South Pacific to great acclaim. She supported the Tuskegee Airmen to become the first Black combat pilots and took a flight with a Black instructor. She supported women and African Americans entering the workforce, encouraged women to learn trades, and campaigned for government-sponsored daycare. During his third term, after 12 successful years in office, greatly aided by his wife, Franklin died of a cerebral hemorrhage at the age of 63. His longtime mistress, Lucy Rutherford, was by his side, and Eleanor was heartbroken to learn the news. She moved to New York City and continued her activism. President Truman appointed her delegate to the United Nations, where she was instrumental in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In 1961, President Kennedy appointed her chair of the Presidential Commission on the Status of Women. She continued to write her newspaper column until her death in 1962, age 78. Eleanor Roosevelt has ranked high on numerous lists of the greatest Americans. In the next video, we'll meet the First Ladies of the mid-20th century and see their roles evolve from housewives to social activists. We'll meet America's style icon and the woman who dethroned her, the first self-made millionaire First Lady, one who saved countless women from breast cancer, and two who brought mental health out of the shadows. Don't want to wait for the next episode? Patrons get exclusive early access to all my multi-part series. For as little as $1 a month, you can become a patron and help me make more fascinating history videos. To join, check out the link in the description. Thank you for watching. Want even more tea on history? Check out the History Tea Time podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts.